Hello everyone, Ventrua here with yet another build guide, and this is my favorite build so far. Initially I thought that after playing Detonate it would be difficult to go to any different class with a little less move speed, but honestly it actually went the other way around. After playing this Bloodmage Detonate Dead character, I have a hard time logging onto my other old characters and playing those, as for whatever reason Detonate Dead just feels that satisfying. And yes, after years of playing Detonated in Path of Exile 1, it is finally time to play it in Path of Exile 2 as well. The build feels amazing in pretty much all content I've tried it out so far. It destroys Breach, it destroys Expedition, Ritual, it's very solid for bossing, and it pretty much never dies as your HP and ES gets overflowed, and you just become a tank. The only downside is that clearing white mobs can be a little slower until you get your detonated chain going, but honestly, I haven't really felt it once I get used to the playstyle. It was just hard for the first hour or two after I switched. The only major downside of Detonate Dead is that you literally cannot play the build until level 58 when you get access to Sacrifice. Even though you get access to Detonate Dead earlier, it's just not playable until that point. So what I ended up doing was using Enfolding Dawn body armor and Oakshorn shield and just level with minions all the way through. You can level with anything you want, but those two uniques make minion leveling pretty easy, strong, fast, and you don't really have to think much, as the power level of minions is not really balanced around having 150 extra spirit during the campaign, so it just felt really smooth. It was pretty much the same way I leveled my Infernalist build, except I didn't actually ascend into Infernalist. And after the campaign, I did my Trial of Sekema floor 3 to get all my Ascendancy points, and then I switched to Detonate Death. And I would recommend doing that. Whether you want to level with minions or something different, that's up to you, but I would recommend switching to Detonate Death after the campaign and after you have obtained the first 3 Ascendancy points. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as it helps the channel a lot. But let's go over how this build actually functions. So I already briefly mentioned Sacrifice, which is important because this is actually why the build even works. This skill allows you to use your undead reviving minions, which is any skeleton, in place of corpses, which allows you to detonate them, like this. So without this, you cannot play this build. It's a spirit reservation that costs 60 spirit. So make sure you are always running this when playing Detonate Dead. Detonate Dead is our main skill. We don't need to level this skill as it doesn't actually scale damage with levels. We just keep it at the lowest level we can, which is level 7. The way it works is, again, either you target your minions or you target corpses on the ground. One thing that is important, and I've seen people misplay this a lot, if you target away from your minions, sometimes it just goes off and doesn't hit anything. So just make sure to target around your minions or around corpses on the ground. But if you have Spell Echo, it alleviates a lot of pressure as the second cast often goes off correctly. We have it linked to Magnified Effect, Corpse Conservation, which is very important as we are trying to get as much of the stat as possible, which is even a reason for our unique wand that we are using that I will go over later. But right now we have 75%. Technically the highest you can get is 80, but 75 feels completely fine, and I've even played the build with 50 and it felt still playable. Spell Echo, Ambush, which basically guarantees us to crit anything that is at full life, which honestly in maps, everything gets crit and dies, so we don't really have to worry about this ever. And then Brutality as our last damage support. The minions we are actually detonating is Skeletal Brute. We just want to get as much HP as possible on it. So Meat Shield, Minion Master, Physical Mastery. And I have Elemental Army there to make sure they never die. But honestly, you don't even need this at all. My Skeletal Brutes have 31,000 HP right now. You can have... I've seen people have 50,000 HP on their Brutes. So they're basically doing almost twice as much damage. But honestly, even at this numbers, it already feels insane. I have a second detonated setup as well. This time, it's a single target setup with Concentrated Effect, Minion Pact, Considered Casting, and Lacerate. Lacerate kinda doesn't do too much, but it is decent enough to include. The last link, if you were to have 6 links, would be Heft. You could also use Heft on a 5 link if you are killing bosses fast. as sometimes the bleed doesn't even take effect before the boss dies, but this is something that you need to feel out. For actual pinnacle bosses, I end up moving around my gems a little bit to put my 6-link DD to be the single target one, and I run Concentrated Effect, Minion Pact, Considered Casting, Corpse Conservation, and Spell Echo. If you have to drop something from this, it would be the Considered Casting. But you only ever do this for actual pinnacle bosses and only on higher difficulties, honestly. You never need to do this for map bosses or anything. You already killed those in a few DD casts anyways, with the setup that I went over previously. Grim Feast is a reservation skill that allows enemies next to us and our minions, when they die, spawn an energy globe, which allows energy shield overflow. What does overflow mean? It means that your energy shield can go above its maximum value up to 2x of the value. So you can gain from 4.6k energy shield up to over 9,000. This is an amazing defensive tool, it is an amazing recovery tool, and it basically means you never die while mapping as long as you're killing monsters and running over their corpses. You should run this on a lot of builds, especially minion builds, as it scales with minion levels on top of everything. And in general, this is just probably the best reservation aura in the game. Mana Tempest is the reason why we have to not use Brutality in your main gem when doing single target, as when you place it down and stand in there, you gain extra damage as lightning to whatever damage you are dealing. Usually the downside of Mana Tempest is the fact that it drains your life as you spend mana in there, but our Detonate Dead, even on a 6-link, costs pretty much no mana, which is amazing, and we can just stand in Mana Tempest and spam our DD away. It is linked with Premeditation, Inspiration, and Murderous Intent. Skeletal Cleric is the second minion in this build, and I highly recommend running some of them. I found the minimum that feels good is 3 Brutes and 1 Cleric. If you have a lot of Spirit, I'm currently running 4 Brutes and 2 Clerics, and it feels perfect. It is linked with Arcane Tempo, Last Gasp, and Ingenuity. Soul Offering gives us 42% more damage when we impale one of our skeletons. Try to not impale your Cleric ideally. You don't have to use this, but I do use it for single target. And the links are Ablatation, Persistent, and Font of Blood for a little bit of regen. And then Enfeeble for our curse with Heightened Curse. Keep Enfeeble low level, as we don't really want to scale the mana cost. I would highly recommend not using Vulnerability, as that curse effectively does nothing, because we already have Armor Break from our skill tree, and you can use a defensive curse whether you prefer Enfeeble or Temporal Chains, is up to you, but I basically never curse honestly, but if I were to actually have to choose one, I would choose Enfeeble. Our Ascendancy is Bloodmage, and the reason we play Bloodmage is because we want the base crit. Normally Detonate Dead has 8% chance to crit, but with Bloodmage we almost get twice the amount. Usually, Sanguinancy is actually a downside, as it adds an extra life cost to your mana cost of your skills. But, as I went over previously, Detonate Dead basically doesn't have a mana cost, so it's not really a big issue. And we can completely ignore this downside while getting the upside of Life Remnants, which allows us to overflow our life. And similar to how we were overflowing our energy shield with Grim Feast, we can double our life pool as well by killing enemies or by critically hitting them. So we run around with 4,000 life and over 9,000 energy shield in maps and never die. Never dying is also further supported by Grasping Wounds. Honestly, you don't even need this node. You could just go for Blood Barbs if you want to for a little bit of extra damage. But I just felt like I didn't need the damage either, so I went for even more defense because I hate dying so much. I actually use my weapon set points on this build, unlike the previous builds. What I do is I spec this whole AoE wheel on my weapon set 1, which is the weapon set I use most of the time. And then for pinnacle bosses, I just switch my weapons to the second set. I don't have 2 sets of weapons, you don't need that at all. And just get a few extra crit nodes, as you can see over here with the green lines, and some extra damage nodes over there. Realistically, you don't even need to do this. The only reason I do this is because might as well. If the system is there, you should probably interact with it. Let's go over the gear for this build, which is actually very simple. One of the items that I think you will want is Enizen's Charge. One that gives you extra chance to not consume corpses when using a skill that would destroy them. This, along with the corpse conservation support gem and these skill notes on the tree, makes it so we in total have 75% chance to not destroy our corpses. So most of the time we can just spam Detonate Dead on like one corpse or two corpses and it goes on for a while. You can play without this wand and it feels completely fine for mapping, but I genuinely just prefer playing with it. As your other option would be, what, using a shield? I think it's only worth it if it's the rarity shield from Ultimatum, otherwise I would use this wand instead. Or Scepter, few things. Ideally you would have Spirit on it, which I unfortunately do not have. Minion life is a good stat, but the main stat we are looking for is plus level to all minion skills. You definitely do not need +5, +3 or +4 Scepter is completely fine. When it comes to the implicit, Malice is the best one. But any implicit is fine as long as it's not Skeletal Warriors. Those actually feel like a downside for the build. And if you can avoid Skeletal Warrior Scepter, I would recommend doing so. Our Helmet is very strong for this build and I would highly recommend using it because it allows you to get a good use of your overflow life as part of the damage you take bypasses energy shield. And not only that, it also gives us an insane amount of energy shield. Right now, it gives me 2000 energy shield, which with overflow is 4000. It's called Atzer's Disdrain. You can even corrupt this. And the stat you care about the most is gain maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. Ideally, you would have this number at 30, or if you corrupt it, even at 36. But that is what you are looking for on the helmet. The rest of the gear is actually quite simple. On Amulet, ideally you would have Spirit, but you don't need to have it. And levels of minion gems, again, those would be amazing, but I know those amulets are expensive. You definitely do not need them. As you can see from the showcase at the start of the video, the damage is plenty without it. I'm playing this build in SSF, so my gear is quite scuffed, and the build still performs amazingly. Body armor, you would ideally want as much energy shield as possible. Life is an extra, but I actually think you shouldn't have life on your energy shield. Having Spirit here is probably better. If I could choose, I would go for energy shield, percent energy shield, and Spirit. But again, try to get as much energy shield as possible, and if you can get other good stats on top of it, that's completely fine. My left rank doesn't even have stats for this build. It just has rarity. You can kind of ignore it. This just shows how easy the gearing is for this build. Right rank actually has some cast speed. I don't think you need this cast speed, as Detonate Dead doesn't scale that well with cast speed because it still has the delay that is not affected by the cast speed when you cast it. But honestly, it is a little bit of quality of life. If you can get it somewhere, it's nice, but you don't need the cast speed. I just want to make that clear. Boots, energy shield, move speed. If you can get live, get live. Belt kinda cannot roll too much good stuff. It's just life and resist. I would actually recommend getting a little bit of strength over here because you need some strength for your scepter. And obviously you need a decent amount of intelligence to equip your gems. So I would recommend getting some strength here. It will alleviate the pressure of your skill tree. And you don't have to get stats on other pieces of your gear if you get it here. And then lastly, gloves. My gloves are actually quite bad. You probably should have a lot more energy shield on your gloves. And probably more life as well. I just wanted some chaos rest and I didn't really have better gloves in SSF. But as you can see, the gear is very bare bones. Outside of the unique wand and unique helmet, which both should be extremely cheap. The only really costly item is probably going to be your scepter, with plus levels of minions, a little bit of spirit if you can get it, and minion life possibly. And maybe your amulet if you try to go for both spirit and minion levels, but again, you do not need that. I don't have it and I'm still destroying all endgame content. So just look at my gear, look at the footage at the start of the video, and it will really show how little gear you actually need to make this build good. But that is gonna be all from me for today. I have some maps to do and I wanna play more Detonate Dead. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment or ask while I'm streaming. Have a great day, everybody. Bye bye.